which you have no defenses. Otherwise, it's not poetry. It's prose, which is about something. And so poetry is that moment in a conversation where you have to have the other person understand what you're saying. And sometimes it's when you're delivering terrible news of a death or an accident, and you have to tell the other person, and they have to hear it. And you have to say it in such a way that it is heard fully. But you have to say it also with the intimacy of care and of understanding at the same time. Poetry is language against which you have no defenses. Please rise now in body or in spirit to sing Come Sing a Song with Me. The words are on screen.
Please remain as you are, standing for the chalice lighting words. As Jessica and Harry come to light our chalice, we will read the words on the screen. Alrighty. We embrace coziness as protection from the cold. We offer tenderness to heal harshness. We practice resilience in the spaces we are worn and worried. We light this chalice in the spirit of rest and renewal. Now you may see.
Now is the time in our service where we will share in the warmth of the language against which we have no defenses, poetry. This is a time to recite or read your favorite piece of poetry as a communal spiritual practice. Feel free to come up to the floor mic as you feel moved and share some poetry. If you didn't bring any poetry with you today, that's okay too. You can take any book from here, look through it, and pick something to share as you feel moved. Once you've shared, allow space for others to share. And since this is a multi-generational worship, we ask that you keep your selections appropriate for all ears. And we encourage you to share short poems or selections from longer poems so that we can hear as many voices as possible. And as we share in this communal spiritual practice, I invite you to notice. Notice your breath as you read, and notice your breath as you listen. Does it get quicker or slower? Notice your body. Does your heart race, or do your shoulders release and go back? Notice your feelings. Does a particular piece make you laugh out loud or bring a tear to your eye? This is reading poetry as a spiritual practice.
Maggie says, "There's no such thing as winter." If you believe in snow, you have to believe in water as it's meant to be, loosed from clouds arranged like asphodel, because that's what it's like to come back, a slow surfacing memory spiraling away. You can sleep so long, whole seasons are forgotten. Like a hospital room plaster spidered with cracks in Portugal shapes. You can love sleep like water, love your heavy limbs, pushing river and ocean aside. After Maggie woke, the doctors had her stringing bracelets of semi-precious beads, and she couldn't stop counting the kinds of blue. Here, summer, in the high shade of a ginkgo, she pulls up a handful of stones on silk, and we drink grapefruit seltzer, listening to the tinny chime of bubbles rising to the air. She can't remember autumn, so we tell her someday this tree will drop its fan-shaped leaves all at once, golden in the October crush of every plant's frantic strip show. Later, we'll see mountains through the scrim of empty branches, and if we can look straight up into the atmosphere, see the same plain old sky revolving. When we ask Maggie what color it is, she always says iolite, picturing beads like raindrops shining azure on the table. She forgets that sometimes things don't stay where you leave them, that the sky fades to white even before the snow begins to fall. It's hard, but we have to tell her, even sapphires don't glow blue without some kind of help.
By Tyler Knight Gregson. Sometimes the only way to catch your breath is to lose it completely.
They asked me what poetry was, and as few things have, it stole my speech for a moment. All I could think to say was that poetry is taking an ache and making it sing.
Percy Speaks While I'm Doing Taxes by Mary Oliver. First of all, I do not want to be doing this. Second of all, Percy does not want me to be doing this. Bent over the desk like a besieged person with dull pencils and innumerable lists of numbers. Outside, the water is blue, the sky is clear, the tide rising. Percy, I say, this has to be done. This is essential. I'll be finished eventually. Keep me in your thoughts, he replies. Just because I can't count to 10 doesn't mean I don't remember yesterday or anticipate today. I'll give you 10 more minutes. And he does. Then shouts, who could resist, his favorite words, let's go.
The Caterpillar by Christina Rossetti. Brown and furry, caterpillar in a hurry, take your walk to the shady leaf or stalk. May no toad spy you, may the little birds pass by you. Spin and die to live again a butterfly.
Whose woods I think I know. His house in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. It's hard for me to flip the mic for you. You got it? I did. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near. Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harnessed bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only sound the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
This is a poem by Billy Collins, the former United States Poet Laureate, and I am dedicating it to all of us here who are over 70. It's called Forgetfulness. The name of the author is the first thing to go, followed obediently by the title, the plot, the heartbreaking conclusion, the entire novel, which suddenly becomes one you've never read, never even heard of. As if one by one, the memories you used to harbor decided to retire to the southern hemisphere of your brain, to a little fishing village where there are no phones. Long ago, you kissed the names of the 9 muses goodbye and watched the quadratic equation pack its bag. And even now, as you memorize the order of the planets, something else is slipping away, a state flower perhaps, the address of an uncle, the capital of Paraguay. Whatever it is you are struggling to remember, it is not poised on the tip of your tongue, not even lurking in some obscure corner of your spleen. It has floated away down a dark mythological river whose name begins with an L, as far as you can recall, well on your way to oblivion, where you will join those who have forgotten how to swim and how to ride a bicycle. No wonder you rise in the middle of the night to look up the date of a famous battle in a book on war. No wonder the moon in the window seems to have drifted out of a love poem that you once knew by heart.
"50 years ago, my dad wrote this poem when he was teaching me what a limerick was,
and it's named after my mom, whose name is Dean. There once was a lady named Dean who fell in her washing machine. She gurgled about and finally got out, and boy, was she ever clean.
Hi, this is a poem by Linda Paston that you may know as a poet who lives close by in Potomac, Maryland. It is raining on the house of Anne Frank is the title. It is raining on the house of Anne Frank and on the tourists herded together under the shadow of their umbrella. On the perfectly silent tourist who would rather be somewhere else, but who wait here on stairs so steep they must rise to some occasion, high in the empty loft, in the quaint toilet, in the skeleton of a kitchen, or on the map, each of its arrows a barb of wire, with all the dates, the expulsions, the forbidden shapes of continents. And across Amsterdam, it is raining on the Van Gogh Museum, where we will hurry next to see how someone else could find the pure center of the light within the dark circle of his demons.
This is another one from Mary Oliver called Storage. When I moved from one house to another, there were many things I had no room for. What does one do? I rented a storage space and filled it. Years passed. Occasionally I went there and looked in, but nothing happened, not a single twinge of the heart. As I grew older, the things I cared about grew fewer, but were more important. So one day I undid the lock and called the trash man. He took everything. I felt like the little donkey when his burden is finally lifted. Things, burn them, make a beautiful fire, more room in your heart for love, for the trees, for the birds who own nothing, the reason they can fly.
This is a poem about Knoxville, Tennessee, written by Nikki Giovanni, I think. I always like summer best. You can eat fresh corn from Daddy's garden and okra and greens and cabbage and lots of barbecue and buttermilk and homemade ice cream at the church picnic and listen to gospel music outside at the church homecoming and go to the mountains with... This page seriously doesn't your grandmother and go barefoot and be warm all the time, not only when you go to bed and sleep.
That's a hard one to follow. Enough. Enough is a powerful concept. Why have we abandoned it? Let those achieving enough step aside, make room for others to get there. Enough means exactly what it says. When you have enough, be happy. Don't we all deserve enough? Of course, the only answer is yes. Imagine people happy with enough. You see comfortable folks. You see stable families. You see good neighbors. You see contentment. Wealth, power, luxury, fame, nice and desirable on their own. Not so good if at the expense of others. Perhaps only allowed after all have enough. Bottom line, enough is enough.
This poem is called Let Us Gather in a Flourishing Way by Juan Felipe Herrera, another American poet laureate. And it's in Spanglish, I hope you can understand. Let us gather in a flourishing way, with sonorous grains abriendo los cantos que cargamos cada día. En el young pasto nuestro cuerpo para regalar y dar feliz pearls of corn flowing árboles de vida en las cuatro esquinas. Let us gather in a flourishing way, contentos, llenos de fuerza, tu vida, giving nacimientos to fragrant ríos, dulces frescos, verdes, turquoise, strong, carne de nuestros hijos, rainbows. Let us gather in a flourishing way, en la luz y en la carne of our heart toil, tranquilos in fields of blossoms, juntos to stretch los brazos, tranquilos, with the rain en la mañana, temprana estrella on our forehead, cielo de calor and wisdom to meet us where we toil siempre, in the garden of our struggle and joy. Let us offer our hearts and saludar our águila, rising freedom, a celebrar woven brazos, branches, ramas, piedras, nopales, plumas, piercings, bursting, figs, and aguacates. Ripe mariposas, fields, and mares claros of our face. To breathe todos en el camino, blessing, seeds to give, to grow maiztlán en las manos de nuestro amor.
Thank you all for sharing the gifts of poetry. We're going to come back and do some more poetry. But before we get to our next open mic, we're going to rise in body and spirit and sing hymn number 55, Darkness of Winter.
We gather each week, not for our needs alone, but to bear witness to our joys and our triumphs, our sorrows, and our disappointments. In this circle of care made sacred by our presence, we make space for life's possibilities and complexities, the many experiences that bless and break our hearts. We come together with our hearts in different places, and yet to serve as companions on the spiritual journey. We hold in our hearts those who are living through the small and extraordinary milestones of life. We hold in our hearts
for whom parenting is a primary spiritual practice. We hold in our hearts those who are mourning a loss or living with or caring for someone with grief or chronic pain, someone who is struggling with illnesses seen or unseen, with mental illness or addictions. We hold in our hearts those who have suffered abuse or injustice, or who is a survivor. In our Cedar Lane community, we send healing wishes to Fred Peters, who is recovering from surgery at Brook Grove Rehab in Olney. And our caring extends beyond Cedar Lane to all those whose lives are lost or impacted by calamities and violence in our world. Especially this week, we remember the 79 people killed in a car bomb attack in Mogadishu, Somalia. The 28 people who were killed in wake of Typhoon Phanphone, which swept through central Philippines on Christmas Eve. And the 5 people injured last night in a knife attack at a Hanukkah party in Monzy, New York. I invite us now to center ourselves in the spirit of prayer or reflection or meditation with these words from the Reverend Mark Stringer. Nameless one of many names, Spirit of life and love, as the year winds down to its close and we are submerged once again in the seasonal darkness we have come to know so well, we have reason to think back upon the year that was, the decade that was, if only because it will soon be gone. We think back to the friends we have made, the sorrow we have endured, the love we have found, the loneliness we have survived. We think back to the blessings of being forgiven and the gift we offered to ourselves when we forgave. We think back to those who listened to us in our times of need and the times we could have listened more. We think back to the things we traded for our time and to what we may have overlooked in the process. We think back to the times when we were afraid and uncertain and we trudged ahead anyway, and the times when we were compassionate when we could have been cold. In this season of still growing night, may we see more clearly against the backdrop of our living, the true light of our lives, the love we give to others, and the peace we nurture in ourselves. As we enter the silence together, those who are mourning a loss or marking the anniversary of a loss are invited to rise in body or in spirit. Let us enter the silence together. May the love which comes from many sources, the love that will not let us go, let us down, or let us off the hook, be in us, among us, and around us as we journey through the seasons of our lives. May it be so. Shalom, Salam, Om Shanti. Amen. You may be seated. In the liberal religious tradition of which we are a part, the giving and receiving of the offering can truly be seen as a holy sacrament, because it is an outward physical sign of the commitment that we make with our heart, our mind, and our spirit, that we make with gratitude and joy, and that gives grace and health in the present and the future. So, knowing ourselves and seeing ourselves as part of this great tradition, and acknowledging what we owe to those who have gone before and those who will follow, we will now give and receive an offering to sustain the mission and ministry of this, our spiritual home.
In the words of Reverend Lynn Ungar, through the work of our hands and the work of our lives, our love is made real. May we be grateful for all that we are and all that we bring and share to build in this beloved community.
Now we will continue with our poetry selections, as you feel so called.
This is a poem by Gabriela Mistral. She's a poet from Chile, and Doña Rosa is going to read it in Spanish, and then I'll do my best to translate it.
Dame la mano y danzaremos, dame la mano y me amarás. Como una sola flor seremos, como una flor y nada más. El mismo verso cantaremos, al mismo paso bailarás. Como una espiga ondularemos, como una espiga y nada más. Te llamas Rosa y yo Esperanza, pero tu nombre olvidarás, porque seremos una danza en la colina y nada más.
Give me your hand and we will dance. Give me your hand and you will love me. Like a lone flower we will be, like a flower and nothing more. The same verse we will sing, to the same pace you will dance. Like wheat we will swing, like wheat and nothing more. Your name is Rosa, and mine is Hope, but our names we will forget, because a dance on the hills is all will be.
Small Kindnesses, written by Darusha Lamaris, the Poet Laureate of Santa Cruz, California. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you pass, or how strangers still say bless you when someone sneezes, left over from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we're saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee, to say thank you to the person handling it, to smile at them, and for them to smile back. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder. And for the driver of the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat, go ahead, you first, and I like your hat.
This is a poem from Tyler Gregson. It's okay to find art in completely ordinary places. It's okay to make it when you can't find it. It's okay to see the world in a way that makes you feel lucky to be in it. It's okay to be in love with every single thing around you. It's okay to wait. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to feel joy pulsing so fiercely through your body you can hear its heartbeat out loud. And it's okay to not be able to find patience to get out of bed each morning. You are so excited to live, but it is also okay to lie there and wish you never had to leave the sheets. There are no wrong answers here. There are no rules beyond this. Be kind to everyone and everything, and give yourself away. It's okay.
This poem is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost, the same poet that this young lady read a poem by that ended, and miles to go before we sleep. This is The Road Not Taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how ways leads on to ways, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
Our love of poetry starts very early, and my own first poetry book was called Laughing Time, about 65 years ago. It was written, the book and all the poems were written by William J. Smith, who later became a U.S. Poet Laureate. And he called them nonsense poems, but they have such deep and clever wording and ideas. Just a way for a young child to get drawn in. In fact, it begins, the first page, "I like this book," said the King of Hearts. "It makes me laugh the way it starts." "I like it also," said his mother. So they sat down and read it to each other. And it ends by, "I like this book," said the King of Spain. "I think I'll read it over again." But I'm going to read you two short ones. They're all short books, poems, that I think are especially appropriate for this morning with us. One is, we're still in our jammies. It's a breakfast time still for a lot of us, and it's just a rainy day. This one is called Jaws. A silver-scaled dragon with jaws, flaming red, sits at my elbow and toasts my bread. I hand him fat slices, and then, one by one, he hands them back when he sees they are done. And the other one, let's say it together. I'll say a line and then you repeat it. It's, again, we're all here together. And it's called Love. So are you ready? I love you. I love you. Let me back up a minute. Don't repeat that. Think of a person very special to you while you say this, or say it to the person next to you. Okay? So let's start again. I love you. I love you. I really do like you. I really do like you. I do not want to strike you. I do not want to shove you. I do want to like you. I do want to love you. And like you and love you. And love you and love you.
This one is for all the other Mary Oliver fans in the house. I know there's at least a few of you in here. And also for Anya. Wild geese, you do not have to be good. You do not have to walk for 100 miles through the desert on your knees, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the mountains and the trees, across the prairies and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you harsh and exciting like the wild geese over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
This is an old one by John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is less. as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee.
This poem is called Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode?
And to close out our poetry this morning, we will sing For All That Is Our Life, hymn number 128. And you can rise in body and or spirit as you are able. Thank you. I felt like we could go on forever and ever. So I'm sorry if you had a poem that you didn't get to share, and certainly we can do this again and share some more at another time. And I'd love to hear, or if you want to send me the poems that you didn't get to share, I'd love to share in the communal spiritual practice of poetry with you anytime. Because the poetry offers us so much from a spiritual perspective. In the same interview that Abi quoted earlier, the poet David White also says, "I've often felt like the deeper discipline of poetry is overhearing yourself say the things you didn't want to know about the world. Something that actually emancipates you from the smaller self out into the larger dispensation that you actually didn't think you deserved." So one of the things we're most afraid of in silence is death of the periphery, the outside concerns, the places where you've been building your personality and where you think you've been building who you are starts to atomize and fall apart. It's one of the basic reasons we find it difficult even just to turn the radio off or the television or not look at our gadget. Is that giving over to something that is going to actually seem as if it's undermining you to begin with and lead to your demise. That intuition, unfortunately, is correct, he says. You are headed towards your demise, but it's leading towards this richer, deeper place that doesn't get corroborated very much in our everyday outer world. So let's go through that a little bit because there's a lot there. The deeper practice of poetry is overhearing yourself say the things you didn't want to know about the world. Overhearing yourself say the things you didn't want to know about the world. Or listening to the things you didn't want to hear about the world. And when I heard that, the first thing that came to mind for me was the poetry of hip-hop. Hip-hop is an example of somebody saying the things you didn't want to hear about the world. Take, for example, Common and John Legend's song Glory, which was written for the movie a few years back. Common, who's also a philosopher poet, says this: "Hands to the heaven, no man, no weapon formed against me. Yes, glory is destined. Every day, women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings. The movement is a rhythm to us. Freedom is like religion to us. Justice is juxtaposition in us. Justice for all just ain't specific enough. One son died, his spirit is revisiting us. Truant living in us. Resistance is us. That's why Rosa sat on the bus. That's why we walk through Ferguson with our hands up. When it go down, we woman and man up. They say stay down and we stand up. Shots, we on the ground, the camera panned up. King pointed to the mountaintop and we ran up." Just this one verse, this one stanza of this poem with a backbeat says the things you didn't want to know about the world, the things the mainstream media would prefer that we forget about in American history. And yet, it says these things in a way that's both affirming and inspiring. When I read Common's poetry, I read his rap and I feel empowered and energized and ready to recommit to racial justice work. He creates this beautiful rallying cry by invoking the Old Testament. No man, no weapon formed against us, yes, glory is destined, is a reference to Isaiah 54:17. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. And that just touches the depth of the illusion, the wordplay, the double entendre that swim in just this one verse, this one stanza of Common's poetry. David White ends his answer to Krista Tippett's question that I read earlier. He ends it with, "You're heading towards your demise, but leading towards this richer, deeper place that doesn't get corroborated very much in our everyday outer world." But I don't think he was actually talking about death when he says demise. I think he's talking about your ego dying, your smaller self. And by creating and reading and listening to poetry, that self that is involved in the daily tasks of the world dies and gives way to a richer, deeper self that lies asleep in most of us. That richer, deeper self is where we can access our own divinity, our own oneness with the divine, with the source of all creation. I've actually had this experience myself when I took an online poetry class with the Church of the Larger Fellowship. Each week for 2 or 3 months, I joined with several other people virtually, and we wrote and read and shared poetry. The goal was not to write good poetry, but to write healing poetry. Here's a poem I wrote, inspired by the theme brokenness. Frayed edges, sturdy core. Memories of newness, long forgotten or never even known. Each stitch restitched, bringing new strength, holding the weight of safety, magic woven into the fabric, made more apparent in the threadbare parts, worn, soft with worry, absorbed, carrying the eternal love of the maker. So like I said, the goal was not to be good, but to be healing, to bring us closer to our richer, deeper selves and further from our ego. Did this poem remind anybody of like a lovey or a stuffed animal? Because that's what the poem was about. My lovey from childhood, my blanket that my grandma made. It reminded me that brokenness isn't always bad. Writing this poem let me go deeper into exploring my connection with something that has been my companion since birth, yet something I don't often consider in my daily life. The cycle of creating, reading, listening to poetry is itself an act of healing. It doesn't have to be good to be healing. Poetry connects us to our own divinity. It gives our busy brains a rest and connects us with the messiness, the chaos, the beauty, and the sacred nature of the human experience. So as we leave 2019 and enter into a new year and a new decade, consider setting some time aside for writing some poetry, reading some poetry, or listening to some poetry. Think about how you can connect with your richer, deeper self, your divine self that is lying under the soil, waiting to bloom. And so I will leave you with this poem to take you into the new year. Burn the Old Year by Naomi Shihab Nye. Letters swallow themselves in seconds. Notes, friends tied to the doorknobs, transparent scarlet paper, sizzle like moth wings, marry the air. So much of any year is flammable, lists of vegetables, partial poems, orange swirling flame of days, so little is a stone. Where there is something and suddenly isn't, an absence shouts, celebrates, leaves a space. I begin again with the smallest numbers. Quick dance, shuffle of losses and leaves, only the things I didn't do crackle after the blazing dies. Now I invite you to rise in body and our spirit for our closing hymn, number 1057, Go Lift It Up. We are going to use the words that are written on the screen, and Jasmine is going to play the music once through, and then we'll sing it twice. Our closing words are from Jacqueline Woodson in her poetry memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming. How to Listen, number 7. Even the silence has a story to tell you. Just listen. Listen. I love that. That was awesome. I didn't do anything. You all did it.